It's a significant moment when your family marries into a new circle. But becoming part of the House of Windsor is an altogether different matter.
It must be an overwhelming sensation to know that you and your child are going to be forever associated with royalty.
What is it like to suddenly find your family intimately within the royal orbit? Is it a dream?
It was a total shock when it came.
Or a royal nightmare?
And I suppose in love. Whatever in love means.
Outsiders have struggled to do well when they enter the royal family.
You ever have disagreements about things?
Oh, yes.
Tonight, the inside story of when the Middletons met the monarchy, when suburbia met the royal firm, told by palace insiders.
I was on duty. There was a girl standing on her own. This lady was Kate Middleton.
Happy birthday, Kate.
And family friends.
There was intense press pressure. Some of the tabloids had come in and said, is it true Carol drives through the village at 50 miles an hour?
Middle-class commoners thrust into the heart of the royal family.
You're not filming this, are you?
What really happened behind closed doors when the party planners went to the palace?
I'd heard that Camilla wasn't very keen on Catherine.
Navigating the frictions within the royal family itself.
I suppose there is a little tension sometimes between who gets to see the grandkids most.
You know what? I'm jealous. How about me?
Does he look like you or Catherine? He's got her looks, thankfully.
There were all kinds of stories about him having drugs, selling drugs, doing drugs.
She had become her royal hotness.
How did the Middletons adapt when they met the House of Windsor?
She's realised that she is going to have to listen to those that have come before her in order to win, and she gets it.
And how will they help shape the future of the royal family?
It will be the Middletons who have the influence because the royal family is stuck in its ways.
One day, Prince George will be King George VII, descended from a family of miners.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are one of the most famous couples on the planet. Despite their very different family backgrounds, Kate started dating William while studying art history at the University of St Andrews. Little did she know this relationship would change her family's life forever.
They are incredibly popular as young members of the royal family on whom an awful lot of responsibility has been placed.
As a commoner, born into a middle-class home counties English family, Kate's integration into the royal family hasn't been easy.
They started dating, but very quietly. No one knew very much about it, only their closest circle of friends. There's talk that when Prince Charles was younger, that his girlfriends used to call him Sir. I can't imagine knowing William that would be anything like that.
Here we have the monarchy. It has its own peculiar rules and protocol which stretch back hundreds of years. Now, can you imagine stepping into that world and trying to integrate yourself? That is a very steep learning curve.
When Kate's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, were invited to an intimate lunch to meet the Queen for the first time, all eyes were on Windsor Castle.
It must have been quite awesome to be going through those doors of the ancient medieval castle, these huge buildings that you know are steeped in history, where terribly important people live.
It was a personal invite from the monarch and a momentous moment for the Middletons.
People act really weird sometimes when they're meeting the Queen. The hands get fidgety, or they start sweating, or start mumbling.
In meeting the monarch, the Middletons needed to navigate the royal rules very carefully. Grant Harold spent 7 years as a butler in the royal household.
One of my jobs was, when people came to meet the royals, was to make sure that they were relaxed, calm, if they wanted any advice or guidance. And that's everything from the gentlemen do a neck bow, not a waist bow. And ladies do a curtsy, not too low down, because otherwise you might not come back up.
I can just imagine Carol going through her wardrobe and trying to choose the perfect gown. I would say that always err on the side of grace and elegance. Preferably a long sleeve. For a gentleman, not too many stripes, not too much fuss.
The purpose of the meeting was really to put them at their ease, but it must be quite an intimidating moment for Carol Middleton, whose great-great-grandfather had been a coal miner in Durham.
Carol apparently said, "Pleased to meet you," when she'd been told to say, "How'd you do?" In the tension of the moment, you forget.
I'm told that the lunch at Windsor Castle went very well. It went on for an hour and a half, which is quite long, actually, by Queen's standards.
John Haley has known the Middletons for over 20 years. They struck up a friendship when the family became regulars at his pub, not far from their home in the Berkshire village of Bucklebury.
We socialised with them, got invited to their house, which was very nice. Mike and Carol got strong personalities. They can get on with anybody. They're so natural, so relaxed, very family-orientated. They just were liked by everybody.
Historically, the in-laws have pretty much become outlaws, but I think Kate made it very clear to William she wasn't going to lose that close connection that she enjoyed with her own family.
They're so isolated from ordinary family life, so there's an enormous gulf. We've seen in the past with people joining the royal family, it can be devastating.
The backgrounds of Carol and Michael Middleton are worlds apart from the Windsors.
Carol was brought up in the early part of her life in a council flat in an impecunious part of West London. You don't have to go back too far in the generations and you reach the Durham connection. For many generations, her family were coal miners.
There have been lots of reports about Carol's very humble upbringings. She was kind of a grafter who moved up the ranks and became a flight attendant at British Airways.
Michael comes from rather slightly grander stock. His family hail from Yorkshire, and they had made a fair bit of money. He became flight dispatcher for British Airways, and do you know what? They ran into one another, and love blossomed.
The Middletons moved to Bucklebury in 1995. Kate and her younger siblings, Pippa and James, enjoyed an idyllic childhood.
Bucklebury is a very quaint little village, as you imagine in an Agatha Christie story. There's a village green, a little butcher's, a newsagent's, little local pub.
Bucklebury is quite a mixture of people. You've got some fabulously wealthy people, lovely big houses. They're a very close-knit community, and they all stand by each other.
The Middleton family are incredibly close. Pippa Middleton is Kate's best friend. They were brought up together. There's only a year or two gap between them.
This fascinating footage of a family wedding filmed in 1991 gives a rare glimpse into the Middleton children's early years.
Kate, Pippa and James were brought up impeccably. Kate is very similar to her father. She is more thoughtful and more discreet, perhaps, than Pippa, and quieter. Personally, I think that the Pippa is more like her mother. She's very outgoing, very sociable, loves partying.
Mike and Carol, they're strong people, very loyal, down-to-earth, hard-working couple. The kids would come in and play in the garden, just like any other family.
I know someone who went to school with Kate and said that they used to have school picnics. Carol had this giant basket and everything was Fortnum and Mason and everything was perfect and looked beautiful. And Carol's entire MO is to do things graciously and beautifully and elegantly.
Carol set up her party pieces enterprise on the kitchen table. Michael then came into the business with her and they turned it into a very successful party paraphernalia business.
They're very ambitious. Carol has been said to be a perfectionist, and it certainly paid off for the Middleton family.
A wealth of opportunities opened up for the Middleton children, and all three were privately educated. At the age of 14, Kate was sent to the prestigious Marlborough College, where fees can hit almost £40,000 a year.
Carol was determined that they would go to very good private schools. She wanted her daughters to make the sort of connections with the right sort of people.
Pippa followed Kate to Marlborough College. The two of them were very competitive with one another. I think, if anything, Pippa became the better sportswoman. She went to Edinburgh, where she read English.
At St Andrews University, Kate and William kept their burgeoning relationship very quiet.
The press was sniffing around and saying, is there something going on here? But they would always say, no, we're just all housemates. You know how it is at university, load of students.
And the rest of the Middletons treated the news with the utmost discretion.
I've interviewed several members of the family over the years, and when William and Kate began dating, Carol actually phoned members of the family to tell them to be on their guard.
I mean, they must have been dying to tell people, do you know, our daughter is dating Prince William. But I think they kept it to a very tight circle.
As William and Kate's relationship blossomed, William visited the Middleton family home in Bucklebury.
I think that there are people that would say, we take us as we are. This is our house, our home, and you're invited into it. But I don't think they would necessarily then think they've got to put on a show.
William and Carol struck a very close bond very early on. He would definitely have been happy to have a mother figure like Carol, who was very nurturing and reliable and trustworthy.
The Bucklebury locals made William feel very much at home.
The very first time actually Prince William came in, the first thing he was looking for was me to be an actor. So we then made sure that we were always covering the stock.
And the family made a visit to the local pub.
2 tables were booked this particular evening by Carol. The second table was for his security. Kate walked straight in. She said, "Hi, John, how are you?" I said, "I'm fine, thank you." She said, "Oh, this is William, John." I shook hands, "Nice to meet you." And it was just so relaxed. They were in the conservatory having a meal, and the press came in the front, but they didn't even know they were there.
A world away from the village of Bucklebury, however, William was planning the introduction of Kate to his family, and importantly, his father.
When Catherine was taken to Highgrove, she would have been prepped by William. Charles and Catherine went for a walk in the garden on their own for a chat. They got on well, but Charles is, someone slightly unkindly put it, is a dry old stick. I think William would have said, look, he's a lovely man, but, you know, he's not the life and soul.
I think that he would have admired the fact that Catherine was quite a mature, well-spoken, and quite a confident girl, actually.
Charles really made a point of welcoming Kate into the family from quite an early stage. She was often invited for shooting weekends up at Burke Hall. It's Charles who largely taught Kate to stalk.
Most of the royal family quite like playing games. They play quite silly games sometimes after dinner. I think she would have found plenty to enjoy with them.
She was taken to Highgrove, to Sandringham. She was taken into these scenarios to judge whether or not she was suited to it, whether she could handle it, whether she hated it. There were so many lessons of Princess Diana because no one wanted another bride who was miserable.
I'd heard that Camilla wasn't very keen on Catherine. She didn't shoot. She's not interested in horses particularly. There was too much of a gap and that William would feel it. But I think it's true to say Camilla later warmed to Catherine and recognised her solid virtues.
Harry took some winning over. I think sometimes he felt that Kate was a bit straight and kept his brother a bit too much on the straight and narrow. And I do remember Harry telling one of their friends, "Oh, he's become so boring." But actually, he grew to love Kate and to see her as the sister, really, that he's never had.
With the Middleton family thrust into the royal inner circle, how would they cope with the scrutiny and the media glare?
She'd be surrounded by news crews, 20 cameramen. It's pretty tough.
What tensions would arise between two families thrown together? And how would both sides deal with them?
I'm sure Carol must have been mortified by the headlines.
I can only imagine it would have been a roller coaster of emotions and a desperate need to want to get it right.
Catherine Middleton.
After graduating from St Andrews University with a 2:1, Kate moved into her parents' flat in London. But she was soon hit with the harsh reality of being the girlfriend of the future monarch, catapulted into the centre of a media frenzy.
Suddenly, overnight, everybody wants a piece of you. Now, psychologically, that can have a hugely stressful impact. In fact, some people who've become famous overnight describe it as being very traumatizing.
She'd be surrounded by news crews, 20 cameramen. It's pretty tough, but she didn't complain about it publicly.
Kate was advised to watch a film of how Diana dealt with the press. That might have been a salutary lesson for Catherine. You've got to accept that early on, you're not going to like it.
The Middletons are now thrown firmly into the spotlight. If you come from a very tight, close family unit, suddenly exposing all the rest of the members to becoming, public fodder can be immensely painful.
Some of the tabloids had come in and said, is it true Carol drives through the village at 50 miles an hour? Well, it's totally untrue. Mike and Carol got strong personalities, so they was able to deal with this. I noticed the odd time they bumped into a reporter in the pub, they would just say, I'm sorry, we don't talk to the press.
Carol and Michael were invited to William's passing out ceremony at Sandhurst. Carol got some very unfair criticism for chewing gum in public. In fact, it was Nicorette, because she'd given up smoking. I'm sure Carol must have been mortified by the headlines.
She got a lot of flack for it. It's got to be quite humiliating. She bore it with good grace. She didn't say anything about it.
When William and Kate split for a period in 2007, the Middleton family were faced with negative headlines.
William made the call and said that I think it's the right person at the wrong time type call. What was quite difficult was that he was not only splitting from Catherine, he was splitting from her family, and he'd become very close to them.
Carol Middleton in particular was a target of the tabloid press.
Snide remarks. She was too pushy. Rumours that Carol and Catherine had a plan to almost ambush William at St Andrews. None of these have been proved to be true.
She had to take some stick over her mum being an air stewardess, cross-deck doors to manual was said a few times, I think. This is a woman that built a very, very successful business, so I don't think she really gave two hoots about it, from what I understand.
William was very upset, and he telephoned the Middletons very quickly to say that the criticisms had not come from him or any of the royals.
You could say they were almost royal in the way they dealt with all the press attention, actually. They're quite savvy, the Middletons. They just put up and shut up, and that was a very sound strategy.
On nights out in London, newly single Kate was seen to be sporting an adventurous style.
It was Carol who said to Kate, you go and show him what he's missing. Carol knew that her daughter was perfect future queen material.
If this was indeed a plan cooked up by Carol Middleton, it certainly worked. Around 10 weeks later, the relationship was back on.
I was so excited that they were actually back together. One of my favourite memories was Prince Charles's birthday. There was a girl standing on her own, but nobody was speaking to her. This lady was Kate Middleton. I felt sorry, so I walked over to her and started chatting to her. The fact they just got back together, and there might have been that thing where people didn't really know what to kind of say.
With William and Kate back together, and the relationship seemingly now stronger than ever, Kate was finally introduced to the most revered royal relative of them all, the Queen. In 2008, Kate attended the wedding of Peter Phillips and Autumn Kelly at St George's Chapel in Windsor.
William wasn't able to go to that wedding. For Catherine to attend on her own was really quite significant.
Covered exclusively by Hello magazine, the photo showed Kate as an accepted member of the Windsor family fold.
I think she did the right thing in keeping to something simple, stylish, but very understated, very demure. I definitely think that her mother would have been central to a lot of her early decisions in terms of style and dressing for important occasions.
I can only imagine it would have been a roller coaster of emotions and a desperate need to want to get it right, and also to impress the Queen, the monarch, but also this is her boyfriend's grandma.
But it was a private moment when Kate finally met the head of the House of Windsor.
It would have been carefully choreographed by royal advisors. She would have been told, you know, just to wait for the Queen, and the Queen would have had someone there to point out Catherine.
At the reception, the Queen came over and spoke to Catherine, and reportedly, you know, they had a little chat. It was very pleasant, and the Queen let it be known that she'd been wanting to meet Catherine for a long time.
I'm sure that the Queen and Kate found loads to talk about. Kate studied history of art at university, and the Queen obviously has an extensive collection of fine paintings, and they both adore the countryside.
You see, the thing about Kate, she just has this ability. I think it's partly being confident, being very smiley, but crucially not being embarrassed about who she is. The Queen would have warmed to that.
Despite establishing her place within the Windsor inner circles, 2 years later, there was still no sign of an engagement ring. It's rumoured Carol Middleton took the delicate matter of her daughter's future into her own hands.
She sat down with William and just said to him, is this going to end in a marriage? She was close enough to be able to do that. William gave his assurance that, you know, he was going to make an honest woman of Kate. He wasn't going to leave her on the shelf.
True to his word, in October 2010, William finally asked Kate to marry him.
They met at university. They will one day be king and queen.
And when the newly engaged couple appeared in their first joint TV interview, Kate's family were at the forefront of William's mind.
Mike and Carol have only been, you know, really sort of loving and caring and really fun, and have been really welcoming towards me, so I felt really part of the family.
For William, what I noticed when he talks about the Middleton family, he goes from clasped hands to open palms and gets very animated. He's telling you, I feel very positively about these people.
I really didn't expect it at all. I thought he might have sort of maybe thought about it, but no. It was a total shock when I came, and very excited.
The excitement about the royal engagement swept the world, and nowhere more so than the Middletons' home village of Bucklebury.
The evening after, there was a massive party. They all come in the pub. I remember Mike got up and gave a speech and thanked everyone and all his friends, and, you know, being good with the family, and we all, you know, really celebrated the news.
In a move breaking with royal precedent, the Middletons held a press conference outside the family home.
It doesn't look too cheesy, does it? No, you sure?
You're not filming this, are you?
Michael and Carol came out looking, to their credit, I think, not dressed up to the nines, looking very relaxed, quite informal. And I think everyone took to them then and thought, oh, they're quite ordinary folk, good for them. They were naturals, actually, in front of the camera.
They make a lovely couple. They're great fun to be with, and we've had a lot of laughs together.
It was so natural for Mike to be able to give this speech and speak to the press from all over the world. And I remember congratulating Mike when I saw him next a few days later.
Was it all right?
Don't need to retake.
The Middletons are actually the ultimate professionals when it comes to being public figures, handling it with confidence and with poise and just getting that note right.
A sweet interview, Carol, as she disappeared into the distance, she flicked her hair back and went, crumbs. Goodness, you know, as if, how extraordinary to be in such an amazing position.
Awesome. Okay.
But nothing could prepare the Middletons for what was coming next, as they entered the royal family's orbit for good, being centre stage at one of the biggest royal weddings in British history.
It was Pippa's rear which caught the attention of the media almost more than the royal bride.
It must have been extraordinarily nerve-wracking for the Middletons. They were absolutely centre stage.
Just a month after getting engaged, William and Kate announced the date of their wedding as the 29th of April 2011.
We saw William and Kate after the announcement of the engagement. As I said, congratulations, it's great news, and I'm sure you'll have a fabulous life together.
I think what people might be surprised to learn is that actually, until that engagement was official, Kate really had no training whatsoever. William had his private office, William had the palace machine behind him.
It's a daunting prospect, but hopefully I'll take it in my stride. Congratulations.
Thanks, guys.
Well done, Will. Thank you. Well, clearly everything changed once they became engaged, because everything is sort of scaled up to another level. From then on, she had full-time police protection, which made a huge difference in terms of keeping the paparazzi at bay. And of course, she had to start beginning to plan on what life within the royal family was going to be like.
The Queen certainly played a role in preparing Catherine to marry William, but not in any sort of formal sense. She would have just given her odd bits of advice, just to encourage her.
The reality is, the Queen lets members of the royal family find their own way. And that's the way she did it. There wouldn't be some sort of, blackboard up, this is how you become a royal wife.
Catherine will have been given advice and some gentle tutoring by courtiers within the royal household. It was all done internally, sort of clothes to wear for what occasion, and how to interact with the public.
It wasn't only Kate that was prepared for life in the royal family. The Middletons themselves were also now to be at the heart of the monarchy.
For the royal family, they've been born and raised into it. They know the rules of engagement at big events like a royal wedding. For the Middleton family, I think it would only be fair to offer them guidance, support and help about protocol. Otherwise, the likelihood for making a mistake is pretty high.
The wider Middleton family would have been given some support, particularly Mum and Dad, so there'd be security checks and making sure they've got all the correct procedures in place for that.
Should be so proud now to know that he's in that position.
William sat down with them, he explained to them how things would change. He made sure that he was there for them. Carol had William's number in her phone, as did Michael, so that they could call him if they needed him.
I remember from a butler's point of view, when I joined, you're made aware from that day forward, your life is never going to be quite the same. So can you imagine when we're talking about Kate Middleton and her family marrying into the royal family? Of course, it is going to change their lives.
As Kate and her family adjusted to life in the royal firmament, plans for the wedding took shape.
I mean, this was not going to be just some ordinary family wedding because it involved the heir in line to the throne. It was going to be at one of the grandest churches in the land, at Westminster Abbey, and inevitably it meant that many of the preparations had to be taken out of the Middletons' hands and put in the hands of the royal household.
Weddings cause fights and rifts in the best of families. And so I'm sure there were some very fraught moments in the planning of William and Kate's wedding as well. The Middletons did spend a lot of money themselves, and with that money came control. She was able to express personal taste and judgment.
The thing about Catherine that works so well is that she does have her own mind, and she does like to make decisions about what she does and how she appears, but she does it within a framework that's acceptable to the royal family.
While Westminster Abbey's surroundings were familiar to the Windsors, there were nods to Middleton family history as well.
So the flower crowns that many of the bridesmaids wore were actually modelled on what we saw in Carol's wedding, which I thought was a really nice touch, because we are learning from and including the rest of the family.
Kate had a very clear idea of how she wanted her wedding to be, and she had to balance that obviously with royal protocol and demands. It was a charming mixture of the Middletons and the Windsors.
For a few of the Middleton family friends in Bucklebury, it meant an unexpected invite.
She said, "Oh, hi, John, this is Pippa." I said, "Oh, what can I do for you?" She said, "Kate's asked me to phone you and would like to know if you'd like to come to the wedding." It was just great of Kate to invite a couple of dozen friends from the area. It says something special about Kate because, you know, she didn't want it just to be a royal wedding. She wanted her family there, her friends there.
But there were others on the Windsor side of the family that would miss out on a coveted invite.
The main controversy over the guest list, and it caused a bit of a ruckus, was the fact that Sarah, the Duchess of York, Prince Andrew's wife, was not invited. I mean, that was a real surprise to everyone.
William had pretty much grown up with Fergie's daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, and he very much wanted them there, but he chose not to invite their mother. It was a controversial decision.
Catherine looked absolutely stunning and incredibly relaxed. I think she looked all the more beautiful because she had her hair down. She brought I don't know, informality almost to this extraordinarily formal occasion.
I remember Kate coming down, and I was looking at Kate, and she looked at me and smiled. And even though I'd seen Kate 1,000 times before, that was amazing.
Kate's wedding dress was designed by Sarah Burton, who is the creative director of Alexander McQueen, one of the most unorthodox, exciting, but almost anti-establishment designers in the world. An absolutely brilliant choice.
Kate may have been determined to do things her way, but royal protocols needed to be adhered to.
There is hierarchy, and of course it has to be the Queen who is the last person to arrive at the church. But I think it was quite interesting to see that a point was being made about Carol. When she arrived at the church, that was a big moment. It was very clear that Carol's arrival as mother of the bride was also going to be a big occasion.
It must have been extraordinarily nerve-wracking for the Middletons because they were absolutely centre stage. Carol Middleton was the mother of the bride, and the cameras were going to focus very much on her. Mike Middleton must have been a bundle of nerves.
I think for Michael, walking his daughter down the aisle would have been a momentous occasion in his own life. It's both an intimate and a public moment for him.
Well, the Middletons, it's certainly true to say, have never sought the limelight. They're very quiet, stable, ordinary. But the very curious thing about the Middletons is that despite their ordinariness, there is something extraordinary about them.
There was one member of the Middleton family in particular who had captured the press and public's imagination.
No one really knew who Pippa Middleton was, but my goodness, if you didn't know who she was before the royal wedding, you certainly knew who she was afterwards.
I think that that dress certainly propelled her into the public domain, with many people discussing her look and her shape and so on.
It had a series of beautiful little satin buttons down the back, all the way down the back, in really rather a demure but undeniably sexy way. And it was Pippa's rear, which caught the attention of the media almost more than the royal bride.
These two families from very different worlds came together publicly for the first time as they stepped onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace.
Well, for William, I would have thought it was probably something that he was fine with because he's been doing it since he was a little kid. But I can imagine for Kate wandering out on the balcony and then you see this huge swathe of people. It must have looked magnificent.
I've been in that room. I've seen, obviously, the balcony. Dare I say, I might even have had a little look through the curtain down the mall, and it's huge.
There's no rehearsal. It's very difficult to rehearse that without everybody seeing you, but there will have been a little bit of jostling and knowing where to stand and getting in the right place.
You're not going to walk out there and find this little footprints or little piece of paper saying Middleton's there, Queen there, Prince Philip over there, Prince Charles there. It doesn't work like that. They might have said beforehand, which side do we go on? And they would say, oh, just keep to the left or keep to the right.
For now, all eyes may have been on Kate and William, but after the wedding, attention quickly turned to Pippa once again.
She had become her royal hotness, and there was a brief spell when everything Pippa did almost eclipsed what her sister was doing. I think Pippa found that quite hard. I've met her once or twice, and she didn't seek this publicity, and she had no idea quite what it was going to do to her.
Now the Middletons were officially part of the royal family, their every move and potential gaffe would be heavily scrutinised.
We were at the palace, there was a level of concern about just how much exposure Pippa was getting.
Then Kate's brother stepped onto the stage.
There were some nude pictures that emerged of James Middleton, taken years before.
In 2011, the lives of the Middleton family became inextricably linked with the Windsors when their eldest daughter married Prince William to become the Duchess of Cambridge.
I think there was a strategy by the royal family, which was a new strategy. In the past, when outsiders had married into their family and the in-laws, if you like, they become known as the outlaws because the royals never really integrated them.
Made it very clear the Middletons couldn't just be cast aside, that they would need to be a part of their lives. And, the royal family took this on.
It was very instructive when we saw Carol invited to share the carriage drive from Windsor Castle to Royal Ascot during Ascot Week.
The biggest event that Carol and Michael Middleton were invited to under a royal umbrella was the 2012 Diamond Jubilee River pageant. And anyone within the royal squadron was there on personal invitation from Her Majesty the Queen.
I think that it was good for Kate. That her family were welcome and important for her as well, because otherwise she would have been isolated. And I think that's the point, is that the last thing the royal family would want after seeing what happened with Princess Diana.
This is one relationship that can't afford to have any crisis. It really can't. I think the monarchy depends on it.
It wasn't just large-scale public events where the two families would come together.
Carol and Mike had already been invited to Balmoral, where they had gone stalking with William and Kate. They'd met the Prince of Wales on several occasions and been welcomed into his homes. From all accounts, when they have got together, they have been perfectly cordial and, and they've got along quite well.
They have been guests of the Queen at Scotland. So I think William's wish that the Middletons be included rather than excluded has very much been listened to by the Queen. She's taken it on board.
The Middletons' sudden elevation into the aristocracy brought with it a unique set of problems, not least that they still had to earn a living.
The Middletons didn't seek the spotlight, but by their circumstance and, of course, who they were and who their daughter had married into, they were the subject of intense scrutiny. And unsurprisingly, their business was something that the press really pored over.
Carol set up the family business, a mail-order party supplies company called Party Pieces, in 1987.
Whenever a new line came on the Party Pieces website, people would be looking to see if that was slightly going to infringe royal protocol. Are they exploiting the royal connections by choosing things to sell?
It wasn't bad publicity for their company, but that's not their fault. They didn't choose their daughter's husband.
They're a hard-working family. They built up a very, very good business, and the press were being very unfair to them.
After her starring role in the wedding, Pippa Middleton was a particular source of fascination to the press and public, and potentially a flashpoint with the royals.
She, like Diana's brother Earl Spencer, came under the spotlight quite a lot. Who she was dating, how she was making her money, etc. Yeah, she became a hot property.
She really was one of the most sought-after socialites on the London party circuit. I mean, I remember being at events and Pippa turned up, the photographers would go crazy.
But with the eyes of the world and the royals upon her, she began to feel the pressure.
Once she was famous, one of the most famous people in the world, there were bound to be accusations that she was using her position as the sister of, the future Queen of England to further her commercial interests.
It was even alleged that Pippa was using her position in the royal orbit to her advantage.
Whether that was getting a deal with Waitrose, writing a party planning book, being on the top of the guest list for some of the biggest parties in London.
This was lampooned in the critically acclaimed satire, The Windsors.
And you know what Harry meant to me?
Well, you've got Johnny now.
Yes, I do. And I'm in love with him. And he just bought me a special ticket, which means I can go to Wimbledon whenever I like.
The caricature of the very tongue-in-cheek Windsors programme portrays her as some sort of upper-class trollop with an eye on making money all the time and exploiting her royal connections.
I'm marrying a billionaire.
Pippa, it's a bit vulgar to talk about money.
That's a 1 with 9 noughts.
Pippa Middleton has had an interesting journey. We had the book on entertainment that was written, although the advance was huge, paid to Pippa and contained such fascinating insights, such as if you're going to host a stargazing party, it's best to do it at night.
I think it did get to the point, particularly for Pippa, where she was advised just to keep a lower profile. I think it did get to the point, certainly where at the palace, there was a level of concern about just how much exposure Pippa was getting. And I think at that point, a word was had, from Kate to her sister, just to say, look, it's in your best interest to just dial this down a little bit.
I think it must be very tough when your sister marries into royalty and becomes royal. All of a sudden, you have to really watch your step because you are being watched. Sadly, it's my own profession, which trains the cameras on the relatives of people in royalty, almost as much as royalty itself.
I think for Kate, she would have been in a kind of emotional dilemma because here we are, she's found somebody she's fallen in love with, she's married them, she's also had to be groomed into the royal role and she understands what that means. She also understands that for her own family members, that carries with it a lot of expectation, very high expectations and protocol, and for them to follow the rules. She may have felt a sense of burden about that, like this is something that I've put upon you because of who I fell in love with.
The The youngest member of the Middleton family, James, wasn't immune to criticism either.
James was a very young man at the time his sister married, and of course, you know, he had a lot of growing up to do.
There were some nude pictures that emerged of James Middleton, taken years before, but splashed across some of the papers. It must be very hard when you're just a private person going about your own life to find your past dragged up and your bins gone through and cameras trained on you when you least expect it.
It was around James's business dealings that the scrutiny became most intense and potentially damaging to the family's new royal connection.
Of course, they're not royal, but they're still somehow connected. So for Pippa and James, every attempt they made to support themselves, to start a business, to write a book, to whatever it was going to be criticized heavily and scrutinized. So there were privileges and perks of being associated with the royals, but there was also a lot of pressure and scrutiny and negative headlines.
James is slightly younger, a few years younger than his sisters, and has been somewhat overshadowed by them, I think, but he is very close to them.
Very much a chip off the Middleton family block. He went to the same school as his sisters, and he went to Edinburgh University. He did not, however, complete his degree course, and he dropped out.
From a very early age, he wasn't particularly looking to go and make a career as a solicitor or something like that. He was looking to set up and run something himself.
James is probably most like Carol. He's very much an entrepreneur. It seemed that he was quite determined to follow in his entrepreneurial parents' footsteps and make something of his life.
He started up several businesses. One went bust, owing a great deal of money, so he was criticised for that.
While James struggled to make his mark in business, other members of the wider Middleton family had no such problems. Carol's brother, Gary Goldsmith, is also a self-made millionaire.
I've met Gary and I had a drink with him and gone out with him a few times. He's a very nice guy, a very successful man in terms of businesses that he's set up in recruitment. Made a lot of money, he bought himself a nice place in Ibiza.
He has this hearty pad, I suppose we might be tempted to call it, with the very amusing name Maison Bang Bang. I think we can tell from that what goes on there.
There were all kinds of stories about him having drugs, selling drugs, doing drugs, whatever, and it was very unseemly. And the fact that William and Kate had actually even stayed at that house, visiting Ibiza at Kate's uncle's house, was embarrassing for the family.
He'd been accused of assaulting his wife. He was portrayed by the press as a bit of a rogue. There were conversations where they just said, look, just keep quiet. I mean, it's the rule for the core members of the Middleton family that they just keep quiet.
Despite their rapid rise to royal circles, the Middletons held firm to the monarchy's mantra: never complain, never explain.
I think the Middletons have been exemplary, actually, in how they've conducted themselves since becoming part of the extended royal family, if you like. They have maintained absolutely the first rule, almost the only rule, which is to be discreet. They've just been in the background, supporting William, supporting Catherine. I think they've fitted in quietly and calmly and handled it all with immense aplomb.
But as Kate began her new role as the Duchess of Cambridge, behind the scenes she also had to navigate the complex politics of the royal family.
Now, if you think about Kate's position, she has been elevated in the pecking order of royalty. And she's now above Beatrice and Eugenie.
Upon her wedding to Prince William in April 2011, Kate was no longer a Middleton. Catherine, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cambridge, was now a Windsor, married into one of the most famous institutions in the world.
The amount of scrutiny that she felt beforehand was nothing compared to the amount of scrutiny that she would face the rest of her life.
A true baptism of fire for any royal is their first overseas engagement. And for Kate, just 2 months after her wedding to Prince William, she faced a daunting 9-day tour of Canada.
They don't get much sleep when they're doing those tours, but at the same time, they're really important that they do them. I once said to the Prince of Wales, I hope you enjoy your vacation. And he's like, it's not a vacation, it's a tour.
With over 1,300 journalists following Kate's every move, the eyes of the world were watching this new royal. Especially as she retraced the steps of William's parents, Charles and Diana, who visited Canada almost 30 years previously.
There was an extraordinary amount of pressure, and it was details like wearing something reflective of when Princess Diana was there, or wearing a brooch that the Queen herself wore when she was in Canada.
Please welcome the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge.
In some ways, it was quite an emotional tour. William was utterly supportive of his wife, loved the fact that the crowds were calling for her, couldn't get enough of Catherine. Whereas with Charles and Diana, Charles very early on, people were calling for his wife when he'd always been the centre of attention. But for William, it just made him even more proud of his lovely new bride.
Despite wowing crowds overseas, back on home soil, Kate faced more pressure as she struggled to hone her royal skill set.
None of us really love public speaking, and it is, for a member of the royal family, a key part of the job description. Now, Catherine's first speech in public is slightly painful to watch because it's not terrible, but it's not great.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for not only accepting me as your patron, but thank you also for inviting me here today.
You can see that she was incredibly nervous. There's zero personality, but to be perfectly honest, for a royal speech, you're not massively meant to put personality in, but you can put a little bit more than what Catherine gave it.
It is a shining example of the support and the care that is delivered not just here, but in the children's hospice movement at large, up and down the country.
The first chapter of Kate's life as a Windsor had started with a whirlwind. But to truly establish herself within the firm, Kate would need to go on the charm offensive.
I think it takes a very long time to become one of the Queen's inner sanctum, inner circle.
I don't think that in any way you could say that Kate would be a friend to the Queen. With the Queen, it's always going to have a slightly more distant relationship.
Kate was therefore faced with a huge dilemma as her first official royal Christmas at Sandringham approached.
What to give someone for Christmas is always a nightmare, isn't it? And what do you give the Queen?
In a revealing documentary broadcast in 2016, Kate gave a behind-the-scenes glimpse of how she used her Middleton upbringing to try and impress the Queen at Christmas.
I can remember again being at Sandringham for the first time at Christmas, and I was worried what to give the Queen as her Christmas present. And I was thinking, gosh, what should I give her? And I thought back to perhaps what would I give my own grandparents, and I thought I'll make her something, which could have gone horribly wrong, but decided to make my granny's recipe of chutney.
Catherine absolutely hit the nail on the head when she decided to give the Queen some homemade chutney. And I think the Queen would have absolutely loved that. And then she showed her sense of humour and her great relationship with Harry by giving him a grow-your-own-girlfriend kit. And they would have loved that.
The gifts may be small, but a royal Christmas is still a grand affair.
Presents are opened on Christmas Eve. They're set out on tables in a grand room at Sandringham. And then Christmas Day itself is quite formal in many ways. I think they always feel that once the Queen retires for the evening, it's a kind of, OK, you know, have another drink, let's just enjoy ourselves now. You're on your best behaviour when the Queen's around.
For Kate, Christmas with the Queen was a very different affair to festivities with the Middletons.
William and Kate tend to divide their time over Christmas between the Middletons and the Royals, which is a much more informal occasion. Apparently, Michael dresses up in fancy dress. He's been known to dress as a sumo wrestler.
I never saw him myself dressing up in any costumes, but that's the sort of guy he is. He's a relaxed guy, he's a family guy and a fun-loving guy. So I could understand why Kate and William wanted to come back there to be able to spend a normal Christmas with the Middletons.
Kate had come a long way from her days as a student at St Andrews University. But had her meteoric rise affected the relationships within the monarchy?
You can't please everybody when you enter a new family. Now, if you think about Kate's position, she has been elevated in the pecking order of royalty, and she's now above Beatrice and Eugenie.
Less than a year after Kate married into the royal family, rumours of tensions within the palace began to gather momentum as Prince Charles looked to streamline the monarchy.
It's tricky for Beatrice and Eugenie, both born true royal princesses, to be bumped down the pecking order. Catherine was the scapegoat. She was the person who came in because she takes a senior position, has an effect on the rest of the family.
A striking image from the Queen's Diamond Jubilee showed a new-look monarchy, with a former Middleton just a year into her royal marriage at its front and centre.
It looks more modern, it looks more considered, but of course within the family it does cause these problems.
From humble beginnings, Kate was now at the forefront of a modern monarchy. But it would be another new addition to the firm that would set in motion one of the family's biggest fallouts.
Do you ever have disagreements about things?
Oh, yes. Healthy disagreement.
OK, the last thing you disagreed on, how do you resolve it?
I can't remember, they come so thick and fast.
When Meghan joined the royal family, everyone assumed that she and Kate would become best buddies because they were both outsiders. But of course, they are naturally very different women.
Kate, in many ways, was sort of collateral damage in all this, and she and Meghan didn't particularly get along. The relationship was not as straightforward as the wider world thought.
Following continual reports of rifts, in 2020 the bombshell announcement came that Harry and Meghan were stepping away from the royal family, less than 2 years after their fairy tale wedding. Had Kate's willingness to toe the monarchical line emphasised Meghan Markle's rebellious streak?
Catherine has just fitted in perfectly, and even if she didn't want to dress a particular way or wear gloves or go through certain formalities, she'd buckle down and do them because she regards that as her role. Whereas Meghan wasn't prepared to do so.
Scandals, frictions and a slimmed-down monarchy have changed the look of the royal family. But the Duchess of Cambridge and her family have stood firm, becoming a touchstone for the Windsors' future.
Catherine is the template for those who wish to marry into the royal family. She's realised that she is going to have to listen to those that have come before her in order to win, and she gets it.
We've seen her blossom, we've seen her grow, and we see her as a senior royal and a future queen.
But as we look even further along the line of succession, who will have more influence on the future of Kate and William's children? The Middletons or the monarchy?
It has been rumoured that Charles felt a little bit jealous at times that Carol and Michael were spending more time with the grandchild than he was. That is a very natural reaction that a lot of grandparents have. You know what? I'm jealous. How about me?
Middleton and Windsor bloodlines came together on the 22nd of July 2013 when Prince George was born at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington.
Who does he look like? Does he look like you or Catherine?
It's got her look, thankfully.
No.
George was born and it was special and everyone's coming in saying, wow, we got the firstborn, a boy, and he's going to be a future king, and Carol is his grandma and Mike, of course, his granddad.
He's absolutely beautiful. They're both doing really well and we're so thrilled.
Kate and William came to visit the Middletons. I was invited round for a glass of wine and we met, and that was a special time. I'm not good with babies, really, but it was good to be able to meet the future king.
And within 5 years, Kate and William's brood had grown with the arrival of Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. One future king and his 2 younger siblings. But who will have the greatest say in their future?
Oh, how's that?
I suspect everyone thinks that in terms of the children, the royal family will inevitably have the most influence. But that's entirely wrong. It will be the Middletons who have the influence because the royal family is too formal, it's too stuck in its ways.
I think there's going to be a modification of the royal upbringing, which is in part just because we're living in different days, but also because Kate had a very sensible upper middle class upbringing, and she'll want her boys to experience some of that.
But is the normal life that Kate and William are keen for their children to live becoming the cause of friction between the Windsor and Middleton grandparents?
I suppose there is a little tension sometimes between who gets to see the grandkids most. Catherine would always turn towards Carol for help, advice, guidance, and just get-togethers and romping around with the kids, possibly before she'd get together with Camilla and Charles.
He was shocked and a little saddened that William and Kate decided their country house should be in Norfolk, a very long way from Highgrove in Gloucestershire, which sort of left him slightly out in the cold.
Prince William has said, look, I'm not going to be just always available with my wife and my family for the royal family. I have another family, and that's Mike and Carol Middleton, and they are very important to me and to Kate and to my children. I mean, he isn't the easiest of grandparents. He likes things to be just so, but on the other hand, he is very generous in his time. He certainly likes to give his grandchildren time if he's got it to spare.
The stark difference between Kate and William's upbringings has led to speculation as to where Prince George will spend his academic years. Typically, a royal tuition starts with boarding school at 8 years old, an age Prince George is fast approaching.
Many people thought George's first school would be the same pre-prep school that William himself went to. We all remember Diana doing the school run with William and Harry in the early 1990s. And then we assumed that George would be packed off to a boarding prep school and ultimately to Eton. They surprised us with their choice of Thomas's prep school in London for George. And I should imagine that Mike and Carol will be pretty involved in what kind of establishment would suit George. One thing's for certain, they'll keep the decision very private for as long as they can.
Regardless of his upbringing, Prince George, along with siblings Charlotte and Louis, will have an undeniable date with destiny.
One day, Prince George will be King George VII. And it's amazing to think that he is descended from a family of miners in County Durham.
The royal family will have to wait and see what sort of added extras that Middleton entrepreneurial spirit will produce in Prince George and his brother and sister. It'll be exciting finding out.
Since their introduction to the royal firm almost 20 years ago, the Middleton family have succeeded where many others have fallen short.
Outsiders have struggled to do well when they enter the royal family. And when you look at how the Middletons are doing, they appear to have understood their role and almost done it by the book.
Fergie's father got into a whole heap of trouble with his domestic life. The Spencers were constantly in the headlines for the wrong reasons. The Middletons have performed exceptionally well.
They sidestepped major pitfalls, charmed the firm, and even became favourites within the palace. Were the Middletons, in fact, the model suburban family to marry into the monarchy?
In this day and age, it's sort of a roller coaster of scandals and salacious headlines. The Middletons look so completely normal and steady in the midst of all of these other things that they were a godsend to the royal family.
The village is very proud of Kate. Mike and Carol have conducted herself so well, considering the pressure they had on them. Not many people could have done that. To integrate with the royal family the way they have, I think they've done an absolutely great job.
I think one of the Middletons' great strengths is they're a very close family and they support one another and they can talk to one another. They just quietly get on with their lives, and that's exactly what you need to do when you're associated with royalty. Don't draw attention to yourselves.
You couldn't have picked a more perfect family to marry into the royals than the Middletons.
If any family were groomed for life inside the royal circle, it was the Fergusons. Marriage brought these two proud households together, and scandal ripped them apart.
Sarah was completely unstoppable.
Discover what really went on behind palace walls.
The Fergusons and the Windsors would have been meeting all the time.
Fergie's sister said Andrew wasn't interested in any of us. He just wanted to go and play with his mother's car radio.
And the truth behind the fallouts.
Sarah's personality really was both her biggest asset and her biggest downfall.
And that's next Saturday at 9, a moment we all wish we could have been there for when Fergie met the monarchy. Don't miss it. And next week, convinced her missing and presumed dead son of 9 years has returned, Jill Halfpenny stars in her brand new original drama The Drowning, starting Monday at 9. Next tonight, My Big Fat Greek Wedding.